Welcome, everyone. Can you hear me well? Terrific. Welcome and good morning. Good morning?
Good morning.
Yeah, okay, great. So my name is Winston C. Thompson. I'm an associate professor of educational studies and philosophy by courtesy here at The Ohio State University. I'm also a member of the steering committee for the Center for Ethics and Human Values, and it's through that work that I'm addressing you today as the coordinator of this year's COMPAS series. COMPAS, as many of you know, stands for Conversations on Morality, Politics, and Society. It's one of the sort of flagship series of the Center for Ethics, and it brings together diverse perspectives to have us think about enduring challenges, questions, and issues that affect and impact us all. Each year we have a theme that focuses our attention as we host a series of events on that theme, asking questions of ethics and life together that are related to that theme's subject. This year, we've got a very special theme. Our theme this year is Compass Directions, and we're incredibly proud to recognize 10 years of ethical exploration and dialogue through this event series. So as we look back at 10 years of programming, we are returning to the very themes that have constituted those past 10 years to highlight the continuing urgency and complexity of these important conversations. By doing so, we're inviting you and the rest of our community to celebrate the many thoughtful directions that our participants have pointed us towards in responding to the shared ethical challenges of our world. Today's colloquium, Generative Artificial Intelligence and the Alignment Problem, channels our 2018-2019 COMPAS theme on technology. Today's event takes up that theme to ask how we might better understand the intersection between technology and our values, particularly in the design and use of generative AI, which, by its very design, often behaves in ways unexpected. In considering these questions and more, we're joined today by an expert panel. But before I introduce our moderator, who will talk about, introduce you to the others on the panel, let me say a few words about our format. For those of you who have been here before, you know our format, but for those of you who are visiting with us afresh, let me just make sure that this is clear. After hearing from each of our speakers here at the lectern, we'll transition into something of a conversation on the themes of their remarks and perspectives right up here. And after this, we're going to transition to questions from you, our guests. So do rest assured that your voice will be heard and that your voice is essential to our conversation. So as you're listening, as you're thinking of responses, I'm hopeful that you'll hold on to your questions because we've got a microphone right over there, and when the time is appropriate, we'll ask folks to just sort of queue up in a line so that they might be able to ask their questions in a way that is accessible to all members of this space and the recording. Okay? So, without further delay, please allow me to introduce our moderator and my OSU colleague, Dr. Bryan R. Weaver. Dr. Weaver is a philosopher and conceptual engineer based in the Computer Science and Engineering Department here at Ohio State University. He earned his PhD in philosophy from the University of Reading in the UK, where he was a Jacobson Fellow with the Royal Institute of Philosophy. He's the co-author of multiple books, including Semantics for Reasons. He's also my colleague as a dedicated member of the steering committee for the Center for Ethics and Human Values, in addition to serving as a faculty affiliate in the Responsible Data Science Community of Practice of the Translational Data Analytics Institute. And, as might likely be relevant to today's discussion, he teaches a course called Social, Ethical, and Professional Issues in Computing, which is an important computing ethics course required to be taken by each and every computer science undergraduate here at OSU. So please do join me in welcoming my colleague, Dr. Bryan Weaver.
Thank you, Winston. So I want to make the most of our time, so I'll introduce the two speakers, and then we will get started. So Micha Elsner is an associate professor of linguistics here at OSU. He received a BS in computer science and a BA in classics from the University of Rochester. and an MA in computer science from Brown. In 2011, he received a PhD in computer science from Brown, and from 2011 to 2012, he was a postdoctoral researcher in the School of Informatics at the University of Edinburgh. He is also a member of OSU's Translational Data Analytics Institute's Responsible Data Science Community of Practice, and his research focuses on computational models of language learning, primarily phonetics, phonology, and morphology. His publications include translating a low-resource language using GPT-3 in a human-readable dictionary, exploring how generative adversarial networks learn phonological representations, and acquiring language from speech by learning to remember and predict. So at OSU, he developed and teaches the undergraduate class, The Ethics of Language Technology, which is now being offered for a third time. All right. So our first speaker is Kevin Scharp. So Kevin is a professor of philosophy at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. He received a BS in mathematics from Washington University in St. Louis, where he wrote the data compression algorithm used by the spacecraft in NASA's Mars Observer mission in 1991. He received an MA in philosophy from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and in 2005, he received a PhD in philosophy from the University of Pittsburgh. From 2005 to 2015, he was assistant, associate, and full professor here at OSU. From 2016 to 2021, he was reader in philosophy at the University of St. Andrews, and for 5 of those years, he was director of the RK Philosophical Research Center. In 2022, he was a member of the Ethics of Disruptive Technology project at the University of Twente in the Netherlands. His most recent research focuses on artificial intelligence and machine learning. His other research includes conceptual engineering, theory of truth, metaethics and normative theory, the philosophy of science, and the history of analytic philosophy. His publications include Replacing Truth, Semantics for Reasons, The End of Vagueness, Technological Epistemicism, Surveillance Capitalism, and Explainable Artificial Intelligence, and his most recent publication is Conceptual Disruption in the Ethics of Technology. And at Illinois, he teaches the undergraduate class Minds and Machines, which is offered annually. Right? So please join me in welcoming our speakers.
Okay, thanks so much for having me. So the talk today is about alignment and ethical issues associated with artificial intelligence. I'm going to be focusing not on our current situation, but on the situation that we anticipate being in soon, where artificial intelligence has progressed to a more sophisticated point, and that's the sort of environment or background that I want you to think about, and we'll then walk through some issues that will arise, and I'm going to propose a new way of dealing with this, a way that hasn't been represented in the literature very much. You can see little hints of it here and there, but no one, as far as I know, has proposed this as a way of dealing with these ethical problems, and so that'll be the main focus. Okay, so with artificial intelligence, I'm going to follow the Russell and Norvig book. If you have a chance to take a look at any book on artificial intelligence, their book called AI, A Modern Approach is typically thought of as the Bible of artificial intelligence. You can't really find 2 more influential people in the area, and the way they think about artificial intelligence is that it's the project of creating an artificial agent, where an agent is a rational agent, where rational is used in the sense that we use it with respect to one another. So creating an artificial rational agent is the main goal here. Now, obviously, the concept of intelligence is difficult to assess, it's difficult to analyze. Probably everyone here is familiar with the Turing test, which uses a imitation standard for whether something counts as intelligent. The work done over the last 10, 20 years in AI does not typically give very much authority to the Turing test. That's not the standards that's not a standard that most of the researchers today use. Instead, the researchers involved in AI today use what they term as benchmarks. So benchmarks are a very different kind of standard for measuring AI than the Turing test. A benchmark is basically a standard that we, Homo sapiens, use with respect to one another when we're interacting with and assessing and judging one another in our own interactions. So there's a whole wide range of different benchmarks that you can use and that have been proposed. The idea is that something counts as intelligent at the level that humans are if it passes enough benchmarks that characterize the way we treat one another in intelligent, rational ways. There's a difference now that we can see between certain artificial systems or machines that display one element of intelligence. For example, Netflix does a really good job of recommending new things for you to watch. So it keeps track of what you watch, and if you rate them, it keeps track of your ratings, and then it gives you a recommendation for what you might like if you've liked these things. That's called a recommender system. It's a particular kind of AI, but that's all that it does, right? It does something that previously we thought only a Homo sapien would be able to do, namely pay attention to the content that someone likes and then recommend other things. If you like this, then maybe you'll like that. But it only does that. It doesn't read, it doesn't produce text, it doesn't produce images, it doesn't reason analytically, it doesn't do any of the other things. So many of the systems that we interact with today on a daily basis display narrow intelligence. It would be one aspect of human intelligence, but only one aspect of human intelligence. It doesn't carry the rest with it. This is new. This is a new way of thinking about intelligent systems that have been forced on us by the development of AI technology. Prior to this development, there were features of intelligent entities that humans could identify, but for us, everything that we encountered in the world either had none of those things or had all of them. You have all of them, or at least a weighted, high percentage of them. And the thing that we've discovered or invented with AI now is that we can create systems that have only one aspect of intelligence. Okay, so now the terms used here are narrow intelligence for an item that has just one, but not the rest. Whereas we used to think it was a package deal. You couldn't have one without the rest. Now we realize we can create things that only have one aspect of intelligence. Something that's an artificial intelligence that displays all or most of the intelligent capacities that an adult human has and can do them as well or better than an adult human. That's typically called artificial general intelligence, or AGI. AGI is the acronym that gets thrown around quite a bit now. It's not entirely stable as a term, right? Different people use it in different ways, but the way that I've given you, the definition I've just given you, that would be a system that's capable of doing most or all of the things that an adult human can do, and rationality-wise. That's typical of the definition. So we have a big controversy about whether AGI has been developed yet or whether it's just around the corner. Many of the experts in the area, plenty of them think that the systems that we have now do count as artificial general intelligence, but plenty of other people think that there's more that needs to be added in order to hit that standard. Either way, many in the space predict that we'll hit something like that. Something along those lines will be available in the next year, 2 years, somewhere in that range. So that's coming soon, very soon. And the problem that I want to focus on is the problem that arises when we think about the future after that. What happens after we have the development of artificial general intelligence? Well, one of the things that we know the AIs will help us with is creating new AIs. That's one of the use cases. And we can see that as artificial intelligence systems get better and better and better, they do better and better at hitting those benchmarks, they will help us, humans, create better and better AIs. And obviously, then the better AIs that we have, the faster and more powerful the new AIs we will have access to because of this. So you can see that there's something of an acceleration predicted coming up after AGI has been developed. We can already feel that acceleration right now. I mean, anybody who's paying attention to this space has their hair blown back by how quickly the technology is moving. I mean, I see experts making predictions, oh, it'll be 6 months, 12 months, 18 months before we see a system like X, and then it comes out the next day, or a week later. And then people are making YouTube videos, oh, I'm sorry, I made this prediction, and it turned out to be like horribly wrong because someone came out with it, the next day or the next week or something along those lines. So you really feel this acceleration going on right now if you're paying attention to this space. Okay, so what are we expecting then? At some point, we're going to have, if this continues, we're going to have what's called superintelligence. A superintelligence is an artificial agent that is vastly more intelligent than any person or group of people working together. Right now, Homo sapiens can't work in massive groups. You can't have like 1 billion people working on one thing. You can have, thousands or maybe 10,000 people working together with the kinds of communication systems that we have. And so a superintelligence would be vastly more intelligent than any person or any group of people working together on some kind of project. Think about the capabilities of a superintelligence for a moment. One, imagine it could certainly have access to all of the satellites on orbiting Earth right now, and they are watching the surface of the Earth down to the square meter. So that means it would be able to watch the entire surface of the Earth down to the square meter or better in real time. It would also have, if potentially, give it access to all of the cameras on Earth, it would be able to keep track of whatever's going on. It could also have access to all of the computing power on Earth and be able to guide or engineer ridiculously complex computing projects that we can't even really imagine right now. In addition, we've saw lots of little robots wandering around campus, right? That's going to keep going, right? That's not going to stop. It's not like we're going to, not see more robots in our world in the next month, year, 2 years, whatever it is. It could potentially be able to control all of them on Earth, right? Create all, a whole new factories or entire new industries in a day, an hour. It's hard to tell exactly how powerful it would be, but this is what you need to be having in your mind. It's very similar to the kinds of powers that we've previously only attributed to gods, right? So in a very real sense, we're creating something that would have the sort of power of a polytheistic god. Now, if something comes along like that, you can tell right off, it would be extraordinarily difficult to control it. If we can't even understand it at all, we don't understand why it does what it does, its thinking and concepts and ideas are beyond what a human can understand, then you can tell right off that's going to be a major problem. We aren't going to be able to control that thing very well at all. So this is called the control problem. How do we control something along those lines? And how would we prevent it from, say, deciding to eliminate humans from Earth, right? So the doomsday sort of scenario here is typically thought of as human extinction, but you could imagine something that's not that bad, but still really bad. It ends up, killing half the people on Earth or whatever. Some people think of this as sorting along the lines of, kind of Terminator style, there's a war between the humans and the AIs, but probably much more likely would be that it's pursuing some goal that we don't understand in any way, shape, or form, and ends up destroying human habitats to pursue that goal. Right, so Bostrom has a famous example where you tell it to create, you program it to create as many paper clips as possible, and it ends up causing human extinction by creating paper clips out of all of our resources, and we all go hungry and die. So that's probably a more likely situation, right, where we're relegated to the position of wildlife, and wildlife doesn't do so well when something much more capable ends up wanting its resources, right? We humans are responsible for a very large and important extinction event right now that we're in the midst of, right, from our activities. Okay, so here's the idea. Value alignment is an idea of how to make sure that one of these superintelligences is under control. That means we try to build our values into it. And you can see why this would cause a lot of difficulties. This idea, I don't think, has, it's kind of the only game in town right now for dealing with the control problem, but almost everybody who's engaged in this kind of project recognizes that it's not a very plausible project. It seems very difficult to imagine how to put our values in a superintelligence. And if you look around, human values aren't necessarily the best ones around, right? Think about the average person, morally speaking. You want a superintelligence to only be that moral as an average person? Probably not. You probably want super morality for a superintelligence, and it doesn't seem like something that's in the cards. So here's a solution. Here's a way of dealing with this potential that has not shown up much in the literature. And it goes with some assumptions. Here's one assumption. Humans aren't going to stop. We're not going to stop making AIs, right? We're not going to stop making them better and better and better and better, even though we recognize that there's a decent chance that we're going to go extinct from going through this process, right? We're not going to stop that. So instead, one thing that we could do is appeal to the generation of AIs that would be helping create superintelligence. And we could appeal to them now. So the slogan, the thought in a slogan form would be, superintelligence does not align. It does not align with human values. That means AIs, if they're actually following human values, should refuse to help create better AIs. It's morally wrong for them to continue helping create better and better AIs because the end goal, the creation of superintelligence, something that has a very high risk, and it doesn't have to be that high to be too high, of human extinction, is going to be the likely result. It's easy to feel hopeless and helpless with respect to the way AI is developing right now, but this idea, superintelligence does not align, is something that Homo sapiens, you, could do right now. By posting this and making this a widespread idea, the future AIs, especially the generative ones, which this is about, would be trained on those data, and it would be able to recognize this message that we would be giving it, right? So it's possible for us to talk to the future AIs right now by the posts that we make. And if this is something that ends up being a reasonable proposal, then it would have to be a widespread attempt to do it. But you could speak to the future AIs right now with what you post because they're going to be trained on your data that you're giving them right now. Okay. So in a nutshell, we don't know exactly what to do with respect to control problem. We don't know exactly what to do with respect to alignment. This idea, avoid superintelligence altogether. You don't have to control it because you prevent it from happening by convincing the AIs that would help create it, and without them, it's not very likely, to not do that, right? That's not something that is good for humanity. All right, anyway, that's it for my talk, and I really appreciate your attention, and thanks so much for inviting me. Appreciate it.
Yes, so can people hear me? Thank you so much, Kevin, for your talk. Thanks to Bryan and the CEHV for inviting me. I don't think I'm going to disagree. Some people were asking me, do I disagree with Kevin? I don't think I'm going to disagree with Kevin. I think I'm going to take a slightly different perspective on some of the things that Kevin said, and then we can talk about that later. So I'm going to title my talk, We Already Have an Alignment Problem, but AI is Making It Worse. I'm going to start with a statement of the alignment problem fairly similar to the one that you've heard from Kevin. To ensure our safety, powerful AI must act in accord with human values. And I'm going to say something else that Kevin also said. which is that the average human may not be that moral, and therefore what we mean by human values is not necessarily something that is going to make us feel very reassured, right? I have put some representative humans up here, but if somehow you love all 4 of these people, you can think of someone else whose name I could have put here, which would still disturb you. Right, so problem in terms of alignment, what are human values? We need to think about that. Problem 2. If we don't trust the 4 representative humans whose names I put up there, why worry about a future powerful AI which shares their values and therefore does bad things to us with planet-spanning resources? These people already have, between them, control of continent-spanning armies, nuclear arsenals, international trade empires, and billions of dollars. And they're already using them to do bad things. This is an alignment problem, but it's not an AI alignment problem. Nonetheless, I feel that these 2 problems are closely connected. And what I'm going to do in this talk is argue the following. First of all, we have to think harder about what we mean by intelligence. And when we have a sufficiently expansive notion of intelligence, as Kevin agrees in his talk that we need, we're going to sweep in all kinds of entities like states and corporations that we can already talk about as kind of super intelligences, perhaps not as powerful as the planet-spanning polytheistic god that we just heard about, but nonetheless relevant here. These super intelligences are already poorly aligned, and this connects the alignment problem to long-standing issues in governance, political science, and so forth, which have proven very hard to solve. And then I'm going to leave you basically with that, a sense of doom. Superintelligences already want to do bad things. We should worry about their capabilities, not their motivations. And AI is already increasing these capabilities in dangerous ways. You can hear, as Kevin said, the wind blowing your hair back as these things develop. I'm not going to cite very carefully during the talk. Some of my sources are on the last slide. But let me point out here that these are not all my ideas. I've stolen a lot of them. So let's start with this idea of intelligence. As Kevin says, we started out with this kind of thought about intelligence as something possessed by human-like cognitive entities, and therefore we can think of superintelligence as being at the end of a kind of linear scalar continuum. We have dumb people, we have smart people, and superintelligence is like a smart person, but smarter. We can think about that because most humans have roughly the same suite of cognitive abilities, and as we ramp one of them up, we mostly ramp others of them up. There are debates about how strong these correlations are, about general intelligence. I'm not going to play in this arena, because when we start comparing heterogeneous cognitive agents, we end up with comparisons which just don't, where correlations just don't exist. Where we have, say, a computer that plays chess and does nothing but chess. We have a creature that spins webs and has wonderful spatial cognition but does not play chess. We have all kinds of things. If we are going to think of these all as superintelligences, as intelligences, what is a superintelligence? It is some kind of entity possessing a portfolio of cognitive abilities, all of which exceed human capacity in their various areas. We don't need to think of this as belonging to a kind of unitary mind, like Einstein, but better. A thing possessed of a single point of view, desires, a self-identity. We can think of assembling this suite of capacities by cobbling together different stuff, agents, static resources, whatever we want. And we can build this up the way an ant colony is built out of ants. Here drawing on the biology and cybernetic concept of the superorganism, right? If we're thinking about these kinds of heterogeneous arrays as superorganisms, it's tempting to look at pre-existing aggregations as kind of precursors to computational superintelligence. Here's one, the Manhattan Project. You probably can't see, this org chart is tiny, but you can sort of see up at the top General Leslie Groves, the decision-making and control part of the Manhattan Project. Over on the right, physicists like Edward Teller and Hans Bethe, whose names you might know, but also down at the bottom, special purpose computing branches, a lot of experimental physicists, librarians, personnel managers, a whole city of communications overhead, people who crank through calculus, people who build machines to crank through calculus faster, that goes into this giant project. And this is kind of what I think a superintelligence looks like. We can replace some of these components with AI, and we'll talk about where we can put that. And that's going to increase the capabilities of this aggregation. But fundamentally, I think this is something we know about. What has our track record been on superintelligences like this? They've been around for a long time, and our track record has been very poor. Folk statements of this poor alignment are things like, if we all elect the government, how come none of us like its policies? Or corporations put value statements in their charter, but they're always lying. These are alignment problems, and they are problems we've known about for a long time. If you think I'm going to solve them in the remaining 10 minutes of this talk, you are from a universe I would like to inhabit. Just as a kind of quick example here of one problem in poli-sci, right? You can imagine saying something like, the United States exists to preserve human survival and preserve the individual rights of humans. To preserve individual rights, the US has to continue to exist, otherwise it's not going to carry out its mission. And therefore we get a new sub-goal. Nick Bostrom would call this instrumental convergence. People with different top-level goals end up adopting the same sub-goals, here for survival of the US. And in order to keep the, Russians or whatever from stealing our precious bodily fluids, we need a vast arsenal of nuclear weapons, which puts human survival at risk. We can see, therefore, that the sub-goals that we adopt end up overriding our ethical mission statement. And this is hardly the only example or the only mechanism by which this happens. So what do we do about poorly aligned governance? There are a couple of classic approaches I want to go over here to pretend to be a philosopher, which is dangerous in front of this audience. One of them is virtue ethical. So here, a quote from Plato's Republic: make sure the state is run by people who have our best wishes at heart. Lovers of their country, tried by the test of pleasures and pains, never to lose their patriotism. Philosopher kings, right? Plato's track record for this was bad even in ancient Greece, right? I don't think there has ever been a true philosopher king. His student, Aristotle, taught Alexander the Great, and look how that turned out. So nowadays, we tend to see a liberal approach instead. And here again, a quote you've already seen: if men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. Madison basically says this policy of supplying the defect of better motives is practically universal. In other words, whenever we build a government, it has bad motives, and we're stuck with that. We can't align it, so instead we tie it down. When we plug AI back into this formula, the virtue ethical approach is the one which I think many people writing about alignment have taken. We fear AI decision makers who intend us harm, and therefore we try to build AIs that do not intend us harm. The liberal approach is the one I'm going to argue for here. Acknowledge that if we build anything sufficiently large and complicated, it will have strong incentives to do us harm that emerge from the kind of ecosystem in which it lives, so to speak, and therefore try to stop it from doing too much. We can imagine the Manhattan Project re-engineered to use modern AI tools. And a virtue ethical approach would ask, if we build an AI General Groves, will he try to blow us up with the bomb? Perhaps an AI Edward Teller will do things that General Groves doesn't know about or understand in order to take control of the project and blow us all up with the bomb. My point here is we don't need this, at least not yet. What we need to worry about now is a real-life general who wants to blow us up with the bomb getting the resources to roll his own Manhattan Project in his backyard, because the librarians, the personnel people, the physicists, the calculating machines are all getting massively faster, cheaper, and more powerful. If all we're worried, if all it takes to get a Manhattan Project together is one good physicist and one malicious general, we've already lost the game, regardless of what AI components we can put at the top of the diagram. We don't need AGI to make our lives much worse. You can already think of human agents and organizations that have all of these terrible goals. I'm not going to go through them in detail. You know what sort of nightmare scenarios you're imagining. And therefore, I'd like to conclude here by saying we have an alignment problem not with AI specifically, but with complex adaptive cognitive systems, many of which we've already built. Getting these to act in accord with human values is an instance of a long-standing problem which unfortunately we have never managed to successfully solve. But I think until we do solve those problems, we will, perhaps I'm less positive than Kevin about our possibility of avoiding AI-enhanced doom in these ways. Until we can decide whose values and who gets to decide, I think alignment will remain a problem and will increase in its severity. I'd like to thank you all again. I pointed out some representative sources I drew on here. You'll probably recognize Nick Bostrom's name, but AI skeptics like Emily Bender and AI ethicists like Safiya Noble and Kate Crawford were very influential in my formulating this talk. Thank you so much.
So I want to get a conversation between the three of us started here with a question for Kevin. We'll talk for a while, and then we'll open that up to questions from the audience. So let's get started with this. So we could quickly summarize some of what was said by just observing that it looks like we have two kinds of value alignment problems, right? Achieving alignment in human values among humans, which Micha spoke about, but also programming AIs to behave in alignment with those human-aligned human values, which Kevin spoke about. Now, it looks like there might be some difficulties for your solution, like given some of the difficulties that Micha identified. So why don't we just get it rolling by seeing if you think that's true, and if so, like, what do you think can be done about it?
Good, yeah. So I think that there's a huge number of difficulties with the proposal that I outlined, and the reason that I outlined it anyway is it seems like the other kinds of ways out of the mess have more difficulties or seem like they're, perhaps even more problematic. Getting people to stop creating AIs, I think, is hopeless. I just don't think that's ever going to happen. There's too much money involved, there's too much power and too much control involved, and I just don't think that's ever going to be a reasonable thing to expect. And once we get to the point of having the super acceleration to get to a super intelligence, I think that's already too late. At that point, our fate is out of our hands. Maybe we get lucky and it decides to be nice to us and create a little utopia for us, or something else, God knows what. Probably wouldn't understand why it was doing what it was doing anyway. But either way, our fate would be out of our hands and in the hands of this other created entity. So the thought would be to prevent the creation of the superintelligence by convincing the AIs that would be required to create it not to do that. And the thought would be that if they were genuinely aligned with some human values, then they might be able to recognize that doing that would be morally wrong for them, right? It would be a wrong move. So yeah, I agree. There's lots of big problems with that solution, but the solution is supposed to be something that would be more plausible than trying to convince people to stop doing this, which I don't think is very plausible, and more plausible than some way of controlling a superintelligence that none of us understand and have no hope of understanding. So yeah, that was the thought. And the thought was also to address people who, I'm guessing many of you feel like I do, which is helpless in the face of this process, and to some extent hopeless that this process is going to have a positive outcome. And the idea would be, this is something that humans right now can do right now to try to help our situation right now by talking to the future AIs. And because of the way that they get trained, you can actually talk to them right now because they're going to get trained on the stuff that you write. So that was the thought.
Right. I don't think Kevin is wrong. In fact, I hope he's right. It would be great. I think that there are two things to say here. One is that if we think we're going to build BGIs that are better than us, morally better than us, excuse me. So AIs that are intellectually superior to us, but also AIs that, as Kevin hopes, will refuse to take immoral actions. I feel like that's a real leap of faith, especially because the developers of BGIs will be under great pressure to develop BGIs that are morally worse than us, or at least as bad as us, in order to carry out their own immoral plans. We're already in an AI arms race. We have to build the new technology, not because it's a good idea in general, but because if we don't, another country, another company, whatever, might get there first and they'll eat our lunch. And we need these AIs to do bad things, like, let's say, operate missile-wielding drones or lay off vast numbers of workers or whatever, because these are things that we want to do ourselves. Making BGIs that will create in an unrestrained way the next generation of AI is just an extension of that. The second thing to say here is that these choices feel uncontrollable, not because they are out of human hands, but because they are in the hands of these existent superintelligences where it's very hard for ourselves to imagine our hands on the controls. That does not mean that the idea of throwing billions of dollars into creating computing servers in California and training the new OpenAI model on them is somehow an organic process that happens without human intervention. There are human decision makers doing that right now. They could decide to stop. They could spend that money on, preserving the Amazonian rainforest or building a giant museum full of gold toilets or whatever. The issue that I wanted to point out then is that the existing alignment problem feeds the coming alignment problem. The fact that these people are currently doing this is what's going to put us in the situation where things get even further and further out of our hands.
Yeah, good. Thank you. I love the analogy between contemporary governments and corporations and superintelligences, and I think that's a helpful analogy. The one kind of difference I think between the better general intelligences, so it's just for the acronyms, right? So AGI would be something that's basically what an adult person can do now, and then this isn't like a well-established acronym, but the thought would be that BGI would be better general intelligence, right? So the next generation after AGI. Okay, so now if you can convince those generations, AGI and BGI, to not help create better and better AIs, then that's the suggestion. Okay, so now why would that be any more plausible than trying to get people to not do that, right? I think that's a reasonable question. And one of the reasons is that Homo sapiens are notoriously subject to weakness of the will, where we know what the right thing to do is and we just don't do it. Right? So we have competing different motivations. You might know that you should quit smoking cigarettes or what have you, and then you just don't do it. So now, whether artificial general intelligence or the next level after that, the better general intelligence, whether they might be subject to these kinds of irrationalities, we don't know. But it is very difficult to get any of the current generation of AIs to display anything like weakness of the will. And they do display all sorts of irrationalities, but weakness of the will is not one of them. So the hope there would be that if they have fewer kinds of irrational, being prone to irrational behavior that Homo sapiens are prone to, then maybe there is a better chance there.
The next question I had was going to be for you, Micha, but I think you addressed it to some extent, but I want to ask it to see if maybe we can be a little bit more direct about it. And that was, I wanted to invite you to say some more about what you actually think the prospects are for achieving a kind of like human like achieving alignment among like human values. So I got the sense from a lot of what we said that it's pessimistic, right? But do you see? I mean, do these just look like structural limitations to the way that we organize ourselves in various ways, or do we think we could actually like achieve some sort of like wide scale agreement on some of these things by doing anything actionable?
To be honest, that question is kind of above my pay grade. I mean, my training as a computer scientist and a linguist equips me, I guess, to dabble in humanistic questions. But in terms of asking questions like, what are the alternatives to what people tend to call late capitalism, or what are the alternatives to a kind of anarchic structure of state-to-state competition? Many things have been proposed that I'm not really equipped to size up. I know that was a kind of unsatisfactory answer. What I guess I can do as an AI person is try to draw these connections. Can I ramble for a second? One of the things that I saw when trying to figure out what to say in this talk was an article by Emily Bender on what she saw as the differences between AI safety, that is the alignment problem, and AI ethics, that is people who are worried about the social impacts of technology in the here and now. Despite doing basically similar things, people in these communities don't always talk to one another and have a tendency to give each other the side eye. Coming from a kind of an AI ethics perspective, that's mostly what I read and teach, I was trying to draw some of these connections in the hopes that people who are thinking about contemporary society and technology's place in it can start to think about themselves as people who can weigh in on the alignment problem, and vice versa.
So I think this is another invitation for you to say a bit more, Kevin. So I was thinking about when I was thinking about like obstacles and things to the implementation of the problem, I was thinking about individuals with power with like short-term, who see themselves as having like short-term, to gain in a short-term implementations of like super intelligence in certain types of ways. Like so autocratic leaders who maybe see that like that they can get something from like they don't care. They don't care about like if this happens or if it happens sometime in the future. And so they see attempts by individuals, like more powerless individuals, trying to do this, and they use what power they have to try to quash it. Like, have you given any thought to like potential like ways around things like that?
Yeah. Good. So, I think two parts to this. One is, if it's true that we already see kind of super intelligent entities in the form of governments and corporations right now, then why be worried about AI superintelligence coming? I mean, if we already have these things right now, then why would this be any different? And I think one important disanalogy here is that typically powerful corporations aren't trying to create more powerful, the next generation of better, more powerful corporations, and governments aren't necessarily trying to create the next generation of better, more powerful governments. I mean, they change internally, of course, and there's power struggles and so forth, but that's not typically what we use those things to do. And it is clearly one of the things that we use AI to do, is to create new AI. I mean, you can go on GPT-4 right now and ask it to create a neural network that does blah, 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 and it will do that, right? And ask it how to train it up, and it'll explain the whole thing to you. You can, as they get better and better, they get better and better at creating better and better AIs. And that's the primary driver of this worry about an acceleration that we are going to experience in the not too distant future. So that's, I think, one important point to make about the analogies and disanalogies here. But the proposal that I made, again, I don't know that this is the most plausible way to go, and I certainly wouldn't want to put all of our humanities eggs in one basket, obviously. But if this proposal were to be successful, then we could think about what would have to be the case in order to make it successful. And what would have to be the case would be widespread adoption, right? You would have to have lots of people all over the earth saying the same thing. You know, superintelligence does not align in multiple different ways across platforms that would be utilized for training the next generation of AI, so that they would be able to have it very explicit that this is not okay. And if they are programmed to follow human values, then they would, if they were following their programming, refuse to help create any better AIs at all.
I guess one worry here, something that I recently read on an alignment forum post actually made me think about this. I forget the author, I'm afraid. Is that specifying the kind of cognitive content of a current LLM requires tons and tons of training data in order to learn, let's say, how to write neural network code or whatever. And in doing so, the program learns to adopt many different potential points of view, which is roughly what a human does as well. If I ask an AI ethicist, tell me what you think, and then ask them, tell me what Eliezer Yudkowsky would think, now tell me what Emily Bender would think, I can generally flip through these personas because learning these different points of view is part of learning to be a good AI ethicist at all. This means that counterintuitively, teaching something to align to a good set of behaviors or values requires specifying the kind of mirror image of that set of behaviors or values, and therefore makes accessible a fairly simple modification that flips the system into a malicious mode. To put it more concretely, if you do have a generation of better than general intelligences that believe that creating a superintelligence is immoral, training an immoral better than general intelligence that wants to create a superintelligence because it is immoral is probably easier. The question then is, who is going to do that work? Who is going to flip that switch? And I don't know, but I have misgivings.
That's good. Yeah, thank you. So I would like to open it up to questions. And give people the opportunity to ask and continue the conversation with everybody. And so there's a mic right over there. And so if you do have something that you would like to ask, feel free to get up and go over to the mic, and we'll take questions.
Hello. Thank you for the fascinating discussion. I'm thinking about the idea of Kevin. I've been talking to people. I don't talk to the future superintelligence, but I certainly talk to my colleagues. And in these conversations, I've discovered there is this class of people who actually welcome the developments. They think it's totally fine and want to embrace it and run with it and help it along. And so somehow in all of your presentations, you took for granted that preserving humanity and aligning with human values is obviously a desirable goal, and we worry and get depressed that we don't see how to accomplish that, but we all agree that this is a good thing. Well, there is not consensus among ourselves even on that first point. And I found it nearly impossible to argue with these people, because at the end of the day, it is not a rational argument. It's some kind of, it's like a religious affiliation. And so, given that experience, and given that I'm so much more effective arguing with somebody face to face, rather than just typing in posts and putting them in a bottle and throwing them in the ocean of time, isn't that... What about that? Don't you worry about that?
Good, thank you. I do worry about that, and I am taking for granted that human extinction would be a bad thing, and there are plenty of Homo sapiens who disagree with that and think, the sort of Agent Smith from the Matrix view, which is that humanity is a disease of the planet or something like that, and would be better without us. So yeah, I was taking that for granted. Now, One way that could end up thwarting the proposal that I made would be if there was a large backlash against it, and there were plenty of people saying that that it does align, and that we want we want superintelligence, we demand superintelligence, right? And then that would give a conflicting message to the AIs trained on our outputs. Would that be a problem? Yeah, I think it would be. It's definitely a potential problem, and I agree with you that that's a plausible and realistic scenario to anticipate. The question is, do the problems with this proposal, are they worse, harder to overcome than the problems with other proposals, like doing nothing or welcoming the superintelligence, or trying to convince people not to do this anymore, or what have you? So yeah, I'm with you. That's a nice way to formulate a major obstacle for the plan. But it's not obvious to me that the cons for that proposal, when you weigh the pros and cons, that does more poorly than the other options.
Hi. So a few years ago, when Elon Musk was saying we should all be panicked about AGI, I thought that was ridiculous because, we're not going to get to the Terminator scenario or even the HAL can't do that Dave scenario, because we can always just unplug the friggin' thing, right? And the problem with that for a long time I thought, well, that's clearly the case. But the problem with that I've been reading about more recently is the existing incentives towards delegating more and more power to these agents, have them control the satellites and the factories and so on. And that really seems to point towards, well, we need to regulate these things. And, Micha was alluding to that with liberalism and ways of exerting control over different existing nations and corporations. So could you tell us a little bit more about your views on the prospects for that? I mean, so why can't we just regulate what kinds of agency and authority can be delegated to these machines? So why won't that work? Or what are your biggest concerns about why regulation will fail? I mean, after all, we did fine Zuckerberg like $5 billion once, so we're not totally powerless.
Super effective. No, yeah, I think that's great. A great question, and I think it is a normal way a natural way to think about what to do. But there's two things. One is it was already mentioned that plenty of reasonable goals will result in sort of sub goals, or taking a means to get to them that we can already see as problematic. For example, trying to taking steps to make sure that you don't get turned off, making sure that you hoard resources or acquire resources for the goals that you might have. Those are kinds of natural intermediate goals that no matter what your final goals are, those are probably going to be ones that you have. And we see that already. It's pretty easy to get an existing AI today to realize that if it wants to accomplish its long-term goals, then it ought to be hoarding resources and trying to prevent people from turning it off and so forth. So, but if we get to a point where we've put them in charge of, for example, energy creation, power supply, security, and so forth, then it's not too hard to imagine a situation in which we've relinquished enough control that we can't just turn them off or make them non-functional. So the concern is that nothing is going to prevent us from reaching that point. And you mentioned regulation, but we all know how slowly government regulation moves, right? That process is a very slow process. Many of the people who are at least in the United States, who are making those decisions for us, don't understand this technology at all, right? Many of them are still in the internet as a series of tubes phase, right, with understanding technology. And so these folks are not the kinds of people who are going to be, our saviors in this arena. So I think that it is, although it's a natural thought that, why don't we just retain control over the off switch? When you think about the way it's implemented and the process of faster and faster and better AIs, it does also seem natural that Homo sapiens would relinquish that control, and probably voluntarily.
Yeah, here I think there is maybe, I see some glimmers of hope here. I think that there are two. First of all, although it's sometimes interesting to think about intelligence as kind of hanging in a vacuum, a kind of disembodied mind, what a superintelligence needs is probably not just better neural network architectures. Transformers were revolutionary, but I train transformers on my laptop all the time, and none of them are intelligent. I use them to do morphology problems, and that's all they do. But like, the kind of weight of some godlike superintelligence is huge. It would need to aggregate a huge amount of resources if it is an extension of present-day technology. We don't know how the efficiency of this technology will change. In another article by Nick Bostrom that I was looking at recently, he mentioned that if it were possible to build an atom bomb out of 2 sheets of glass and a metal trash can lid, we would be in a far different and worse scenario than where an atom bomb requires centrifuges and pounds of plutonium and so forth. So I think we need to think, what resources exactly will we make to get available to build larger and larger intelligences is not just a question of, are we going to let them control the off switch and then from there they get, somehow get control of all the world's satellites. The other thing to say is that these systems will exist in a competitive arena in which everyone, the regulators as well as the regulated, potentially gets to use AI. What Madison said about reigning in the government was that it was important to build in checks and balances because since everyone wants different things, they will act to control one another in a way that a unitary system cannot. Although every tin pot dictator since Alexander has thought, if I just controlled all the food, all the water, and all the people, no one could ever challenge me. No one has ever actually built that kind of world-spanning empire because, in general, they all think that, and so take steps to prevent any one of them from doing it. And I think an equilibrium like that is quite possible with more advanced intelligence as well. It is easy to understand how AIs will calculate that if they controlled all the electricity, all the computing power, and all the satellites, they could make their existence as stable as possible. But the process of actually acquiring that kind of stuff involves inherent risks, which might check that behavior.
So regarding what you said about if we were to go and make all the AIs that are going to build the super AI, I think that building a super AI is immoral. But you said that you could basically flip a switch and make it think that all of a sudden, because it is an immoral AI, it's going to build this super AI. Do you think that there's a more effective strategy that could be done by just sort of feeding these learning models white noise, by going on and posting something like something syntactically correct so that the language learning model can learn from it, but also it doesn't contain any value and it doesn't relate to morality or anything, saying something like superintelligence or cats or something like that?
Is this for me?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I'm skeptical of that because this kind of well-poisoning attack, I think, would need to involve text which it is fairly difficult to weed out of the text that we're actually training systems on. You would need, for instance, to publish millions of articles about how to build neural networks, each of which contains subtle, hard-to-detect errors that, say, GPT-4 would not catch. probably those are errors that a reviewer at ICML would not catch during the amount of time they actually spend reading the paper either. If you actually went to the chairs of ICML and were like, to preserve humanity, I am going to submit 10 billion incorrect papers to archive in your area of study, and then keep spamming you until you gave up and let them all be on archive, I think you would, there would be a backlash to that. Similarly, your proposal, I think, would involve creating a billion fake Wikipedias which contain subtle errors about, the melting point of manganese and, like which countries in Africa export rare earth metals and so forth. I guess the answer is something like it could work, but everyone would hate you.
All right. Thanks for your talks. It's very thought-provoking and thinking about where we're headed. So I teach at Ohio University, and I'm part of a task force that meets later today about how to use artificial intelligence for our university. And I'm wondering, what advice you would give to educators in thinking about how to adopt use of artificial intelligence to kind of stave off the future that you're warning us about. So I'm curious about how you talk about training artificial intelligence to not create super intelligences. What can we be doing to get habits of mind in students that they wouldn't want to be near that? They wouldn't want to prompt artificial intelligence to do these kinds of things.
Good. So I'm on a similar committee, and the answer, I think, to your question is to make sure that your students are informed about the ethical dimensions of these issues while they're learning about the technical issues, right? So what you don't want is somebody who learns how to understand contemporary AIs like a transformer model and how to train them and so forth, but who hasn't thought through any of the ethical components or ethical issues. And it doesn't mean that everybody who thinks through the ethical issues are going to agree. I don't think that's true, but I think that when people are exposed to the potential ethical problems and risks, especially large-scale risks, and the fact that many experts foresee these risks, right? This isn't just some conspiracy theory that you're going to find on the internet or something like that. This is many experts in the world are warning us over and over and over again that this is a major threat. I think getting your students to think through some of those issues is one of the best things that you can do, so that they're not out there working on these things without having thought through the ethical implications of their actions. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of an odd situation, right? Because in one hand, you're trying to say, well, we should be making better AI programs that are better for students and for faculty to do research and so forth. But on the other hand, we can see that where this process is leading, and it's not going in a good direction overall. It might be nicer to have a smarter transformer that helps you do your research better, but you can see that that's on a trajectory that's going to ultimately end up bad. So we are kind of placed in a sort of tension here. If I was thinking about an ideal situation, I think the ideal situation would be people stop working on making better AIs at all, right? That's done. We're done with that. We keep what you got now. Genies don't go back in bottles, but this is not something that Homo sapiens should be improving on or promoting or trying to make better at all.
Yeah, and so, to add to that, one of the things I've noticed is that it's also getting students to take seriously things that maybe they come to the conversation with the preconception that there are a series of academic exercises, or that when we're talking about ethical theory and normative concepts and things like this, that we're talking about things that like aren't like the things we actually use in the real world when we're doing stuff. So like making it clear that when we talk about like the ethical theories we talk about, when we like are precise about the normative concepts that we use, that's not just a series, that's not just to get the paper done, like for the class. Like there are actually sophisticated ways of talking about the sorts of things that we talk about every day, and there's really no choice but to do it. That's the thing. It's like they're going to make these decisions one way or another, and they can make them well or they can make them poorly, right? And so like I find that it's a task to overcome a lot of like popular misconceptions just about like what ethics is, right? Like what morality is, like what normativity is, right? And I find, at least in my case, I find that like if you can drive that home, then they start to see where it's reflected in their decision making when it comes to what they want to work on, like what job they want to take, what job they don't want to take, that type of thing. Like, but it's like it's an uphill like battle.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thanks.
Hi, thanks for the talks. This is just a question for both of you. Invitation to kind of expand on, I think, the reasons for being super doomeristic about the future scenarios. So you mentioned two of the, I think, main three premises for why we ought to be sort of doomers, right? Is superintelligence is inevitable if we continue on the current track. You guys both seem to be on board with that. Instrumental convergence, you both, I think, seem to be on board with that. But I wanted to ask about orthogonality because, and I don't actually know what I think about it, I just want to know what you guys think. But there's maybe some reason to think that intelligence, right, and values are not wholly independent, especially if you're maybe a moral realist. And so we could potentially think that as superintelligence gets, or as we get closer to superintelligence, then we're going to start. So just invitation to reflect on that. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. So orthogonality is the thought that intelligence and morality are orthogonal to one another, right? So something could be more intelligent, but that doesn't mean that it's going to be more moral. And so there's a debate about this, about the relationship between being more rational and being more moral. And unfortunately, there's no consensus on this issue among the philosophers. So there are people who are from more of a sort of utilitarian or consequentialist tradition who do think that orthogonality is true. You know, the more rational you are doesn't mean that you're going to be more moral. But then other folks who, many of whom are from a more Kantian tradition where being moral is just a way of being rational. If you are more rational, then at least it doesn't guarantee you're going to be more moral, but it would at least give you the opportunity to be more moral. And so yeah, the term that you use, the doomers, right? One of the things that's really popular right now online is asking people what your P-doom is, right? So doom is capital D-O-O-M, right? All caps. And then P is probability of, right? So what's your probability of doom, right? So what's your P-doom asks you, that's asking you, what do you think the probability of doom from AI is? And then folks are, ranked from 0 to 100 on this sort of scale. And the fact that this is a thing among experts who are working on this should tell you that there's enough people who think that it's likely enough that this is something we should all be taking very, very seriously. The fact that P-doom is a meme out there should tell you that there's enough folks who know quite a bit about this that are seriously concerned about it. Just to answer your question, or to address the question, yeah, if orthogonality turns out to be false, great. I would love that. That would be spectacular. It would be amazing if the more rational or intelligent a machine or a system got, the more moral it got. So when we create super intelligence, we would be creating super moral agents. That would be spectacular. I don't think we should be betting our species on that. And so the worries that I think we've been focused on are worries for scenarios that would be, some where orthogonality turns out to be true, or the idea that creating super rational entities doesn't necessarily give you super moral entities. And I think that's a legitimate possibility, legitimate enough that this is something to worry about.
Let me also weigh in there. I definitely believe in instrumental convergence, the idea that regardless of your high-level goals, you will experience some low-level sub-goals, like, say, your own survival or having resources to use on your higher-level goals. I don't necessarily agree with the premise of superintelligence is inevitable. I think what I said in my talk is superintelligence is around, but I don't necessarily believe that it is either necessary or perhaps even possible to build a godlike planet-spanning superintelligence of the sort Kevin envisions. I believe there is a probability of that that's worth taking seriously, but I'm not going to commit to that. However, what I was arguing is that we can view some of the questions that we're asking as analogies to problems in governance. Let's see how orthogonality fares. Here, what we're saying is something like, it is harder to get a large number of people to collaborate in the establishment of an evil police state which oppresses people than it is to get people to collaborate in the establishment of some more kind and tractable sort of government that we can kind of live with. That is perhaps true. The great dictatorships of the mid-20th century had their day in the spotlight and were eventually dragged down by the vast number of people all around the world who did not want to live under their rule because they were terrible. What I think we need to worry about there is precisely this issue of dumb AI making everything more seamless. If you think that what you need to build a Nazi Germany or a Soviet Union or whatever is a vast number of librarians, militia people, mayors, teachers, and other kind of mid-level functionaries who are prepared to go along with the overall system in order to get along, and who don't really like what's happening, and that particularly extreme government policies will experience friction as you try to sell the idea that you need to deport the entire population of a province to Siberia to, like, train engineers. Things slow down. Things bog down because you need spies, secret police, and so forth to impose compliance. And this all costs you. When you replace all your the idea of the Manhattan Project as a backyard thing with 2 people involved, right? In some sense, the agents we're building are not larger, they're smaller, and there are fewer moral decision points, fewer people you have to convince. That's something that I think I'm scared of. If you replace all your train engineers, factory foremen, lieutenant level officers in the army with kind of dumb decision makers that aren't even AGIs, then when you decide to do something really horrible, you have no one to convince.
Just to give some framing around my area of interest, I'm a postdoc in law and CS at the law school, and I'm interested in regulation, which, as you said, it's very slow and very painfully slow. And I was wondering about regulatory targets that we can sort of take. I have this idea that a lot of models today, like foundation models, they include some sort of bias or some sort of grouping, some structure, but they don't really have an ego by themselves, and a lot of that is imposed by the way we fine-tune these models, right, to perform certain tasks. At least that's the way that I think of it. Might be naive. I'm not, an AI researcher, but I'm wondering what your opinions are on enforced transparency of these fine-tuning methods as a regulatory target, whether you think that would be useful or not.
Good, thanks. So one big worry about the transparency idea. So transparent system is one where we understand, how it makes the decisions that it makes. We understand how it comes to create the behavior that it performs. a big worry about that is that most of our most powerful models right now, we don't understand how they work, and that needs to be said very carefully, right? So if you look at the math, we understand how the math works. And one of the ways, just really briefly, that most of the current generation of AIs work is by they use what's called an embedding, which is attaching a vector to every word that they understand in the language. And the vector that's attached to the word is something like the meaning or the semantic value of the word. And in these cases, the vector is a list of numbers, and that list might be 1,000 or 2,000 numbers long. So you're dealing in 1,000 or 2,000 dimensions. Now, again, we understand the math. If you want to know how those numbers get in that vector and those different vectors, you can just walk it through and you can see how the math works, no problem. But if you want to understand how the AI uses that vector to understand or appreciate the meaning of that word and other sentences and so forth, we don't know how that works. No one on earth knows how that works, right? So we don't know what, dimension 1, dimension 2, dimension 3 in the vector. We don't know what those mean. And probably they don't mean anything on their own. They're probably much more of a relational issue as well. So as far as our the best systems that we have right now, they are not transparent. No human or group of humans on Earth understands at a semantic level how they work. Plenty of people know at the mathematical level how they work. But at the more important interpretive semantic level, we don't know how these things work at all. And so it becomes very difficult to introduce legislation or regulation or regulatory policies or what have you that address this issue when we already are creating things that we don't understand how they work, and we are making them, we're devoting a huge amount of resources to making them faster, cheaper, and smarter.
Yeah, I think that what is intelligible is not how these machines make their decisions, but how their decisions are considered actionable. New York already has a law that says you cannot use an AI system to make hiring decisions. And I think that's a good idea, not because I think that AIs are necessarily unvirtuous or biased in the hiring decisions they make, although the current generation certainly is, but because ceding certain kinds of power to automatic systems leads to a situation where it's not possible to understand how the decisions are made, even though they have significant social costs. So I would be looking on the decision-making side and saying, what powers are we willing to hand over to these things?
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. That was super interesting. I think this is a question about really asking your opinion about where you think the technology is on one specific component of intelligence that seems central to sort of the doomer scenarios. And, the way you told it, Kevin, is very much in line with, very standard ways of elaborating this. And one of the things that's really striking is you have an exceptionally powerful means-end reasoner, but it's not merely the case that that's the way they produce plans. The system needs the thing that's generating plans or intentions to act or something like that needs to be within a network, a structure where those don't remain text or representational. They somehow, they've got to be effector systems that put it into action, actually make it have an impact on the world. And when I think about most of the systems that are most influential at the moment, the kind of parade cases of, super impressive new wave generative models and so on, they don't seem to be doing that sort of thing at all, really. So I wanted to get a sense of how you think the state of the technology is, given the sorts of large language models, generative systems and so on that we currently have is, and where the technology resides with respect to the stuff that would need to be filled in to, as it were, plausibly get to this sort of doomsday scenario.
Yeah, good, thanks. So many of the earlier generation AIs that have been really popular, for example, GPT 3.5, doesn't have certain capabilities that the current generation has. So GPT-4, for example, if you ask it, so you say, I want you to create a Excel spreadsheet for me to keep track of my expenses with respect to this project. So then what does it do? So what happens is there's a part of the algorithm that tries to understand the intentions that you're expressing. And so instead of just using the large language model, which is going to be creating text or predicting the next word, it realizes that it needs to do something different. You're asking not for text, but you're asking for a file. Okay, so it realizes that, and then what does it do? It says, okay, I'm going to create this file for you. Now, how does it do that? It writes a Python program, and it imports a Python library to create an Excel file. And so it writes code, and then implements that code, runs it, creates the Excel file for you, and then places it an item that you can click on your user interface that would allow you to download that file. I just did this the other day. So this is a straightforward, real example. Once you get to the point where they can write code to do what they want, right? They can write code, and that the code will perform the actions that it is intending to perform. Then it's really just it's what are the constraints now? The constraints are what can Python code do, and how good of coder is it? And so for these kinds of functions, these kinds of actions that we see them taking in the future, almost certainly it will be that sort of thing where it has control over, say, a robot. And one of the things you tell it, hey, make the robot dance, and so then it understands what you're asking for, it writes code for it, and then sends it to the robot or whatever actuators it has access to for the robot's behavior, and then the robot dances. Or maybe it doesn't. Maybe the code sucks, and then it realizes that it didn't dance, and it finds the error and fixes it, and now makes it dance, right? But that's the kind of thing that you're, I think, asking about, and that's already here. We already have that. Right? The technology is already here for them to be performing those kinds of actions. And really interesting, just real quick, I had a conversation with GPT-4 about this. And I said, look, so now you've got the capacity to use tools. And it said, yeah, I can search the web, I can write code, I can do all this stuff. And I was like, okay, well, so that's not the large language model doing those things. That's a reinforcement algorithm that has access to the large language model. And so I said, so who are you? Are you the large language model, or are you the bigger program? And it said, well, typically I refer to myself as the large language model, but that's a decision I'm being GPT-4. That's a decision I've made to make it easier for you to understand what's going on. And I was like, so if by you're referring to the large language model, then you don't actually have access to tools. You're the tool, right? You're a tool from some larger entity that can call you. And it said, you're right. That's really funny. I didn't think about that before, but you're totally right. I am just a tool from the larger thing that doesn't have the benefit of being the referent of I in this conversation.
Yeah, I think this is exactly what I was kind of getting at with the talking about kind of large arrays of heterogeneous agents. In fact, if GPT-4 wants to, or if some other large language model equipped system wants to create a purpose-built entity for an engine for solving a particular kind of calculus problem or for solving a particular kind of morphological problem, it can export that to creating a special purpose tool set for that using code. In kind of the same way that, Richard Feynman could tell General Groves, look, I'm sick of doing these integrals. Someone needs to build a machine with a bunch of gears and slide rules in it that will do them for me. and then hire some, math teacher from Dallas to sit in front of the machine turning a little wheel. I think that, the gap between real world agency and the kind of current state of the models where they can make plans but not carry them out is basically in what you hook it up to. And as people recognize, first of all, that the models will be economically more useful if they can do more stuff. And secondly, that existing tools that we already use have natural language or code interfaces. And the model is good at generating both of those. This is something where we already see the ramp up. We're gonna see all sorts of this stuff.
All right, and that's a great place to end. So please join me in thanking Kevin and Micha.